And we're off. Hello, welcome. This is our next step. We are now going to talk about. I gave you a little introduction last time of the end of the war and how the Cold War began, and now we're going to spend this evening or this time together talking about the Cold War specifically, and then we'll get into more details about some of the finer things as we move through this unit this week and into next week. So here we go. The Cold War. All right, so here's our world, the blues and the reds. Basically, the blue are your NATO countries. You have the Bangkok Security Organization, that's the slightly less dark blue. And then you have other anti communist countries. Um, your Warsaw Pact countries, remember that was the group that was created as a response to NATO. Then you have Soviet aligned socialist countries. So these are countries that are socialist and so kind of orient themselves more towards the Soviet Union. And then you just have other Soviet states who are not necessarily socialist, but tend again to view the Soviet Union a little more favorably. And when you look at some of these countries, it poses some interesting questions like India, Yugoslavia, obviously. Um, Over here in Central America, a lot of African countries that would be predominantly Muslim, especially along the Mediterranean and down by the sea. But anyway, those are some things to think about as to why those countries would opt to support the Soviet Union, and we can talk about that a little later. So, from 1945 to 1991, there were varying degrees of tension between these two axes of power. Um, there were proxy wars, there was an arms race, there was a space race, um, which all led to one of the most famous acronyms of all, which is this idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction. That was sort of the ongoing umbrella hanging over all of this that kept both sides, ultimately, I guess you could say, from actually, pushing the button and launching missiles. So there you go. So this is where we are at the end of World War II until 1991. We emerged from World War II as the only atomic power until 1949. In 1949, the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. So, for that 4 year window, there is no other country on Earth up until that point from any time that has the sheer raw power that the United States has from 45 to 49. Now we all are sons of, anyway, that's from Kenneth Bainbridge. There you go. Bit cheese. Okay. The USSR will be turning out long range missiles like sausage. That's what Nikita Khrushchev said. Khrushchev was the premier after Stalin, just so you know. So they're going to get right to it, and they're going to be all in trying to keep up and surpass the United States in the production of nuclear weapons. Yay. Okay. In 1953, both the United States and the Soviet Union had hydrogen bombs. An arms race now begins as we try and increase stockpiles, so like raw numbers of missiles and of nuclear weapons, as well as types and improvements, whether it be in delivery systems or in the warhead itself. Oh, man, can't read that. That's horrible. Does it get any better? No. Anyway, the hydrogen bomb, I think, it's telling me it's much more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and I will get an actual number and get that back to you. But it's much more powerful by a fold of magnitude. The arms race raised tension. It caused fear of nuclear Armageddon throughout the Cold War. There was this underlying fear that at any moment someone could launch. But remember, you have nothing to fear so long as you have a desk. Okay. And then this is just showing you some of the weapons that were built, and it just shows you how tall they are. And again, that's a bunker buster. So that's basically your standard bomb, conventional weapon. Then Hiroshima, and then Trinity, and then Miko Bravo, and then Tsar Bomba. My youngest son told me about Tsar Bomba and just how powerful it is. But that's where we are. Yay. Okay. USSR, 13,000 roughly missiles. United States, 10,000 or 10 missiles. Let's be honest. It really doesn't matter if they have 50,000 more. You don't need that many missiles to get the job done. So if it makes them feel better, if it makes the United States to feel better that we have 10,000 missiles, then okay. At least we're not as bad as them. And then more stuff here, more tests, more showing you what they do. Yeah, from a purely scientific standpoint, they are amazing. Korea in 1950 to 53, the Korean War. Well, actually, it's technically not a war. No war was declared. We did not get congressional support, but it is a conflict, so we'll count it. It's the first major proxy war. It's a war between the two countries, but not really between the two countries. That's why that's where you get the idea of a proxy war. Like it's about capitalism versus communism, United States versus Soviet Union, but it's not the United States and Soviet Union actually firing shots. Um, it's the United States firing shots at Soviet armed North Koreans. All right. Proxy or limited wars involved one superpower and was limited to conventional, not nuclear conflict in one region. So again, it doesn't involve both. And this map kind of shows you where conflicts occurred. In Central America, in Nicaragua, and El Salvador. I think that's Honduras. In Venezuela, and Peru, and Chile, and Argentina. Those are communist people. Anti-communist people in Ethiopia, and I think Angola and Mozambique. Afghanistan had anti-communist people, pro-communist people in Thailand, or Burma, Myanmar, right there. So you can see all over the world throughout the course of this struggle or this conflict, there were skirmishes that directly involved one, but not the other. And all these battles were conventional in nature, traditional guns, missiles, nothing nuclear. Korea was divided after World War II. Communists had the North, and the democratically operating Seoul and South Korea had the South. The 38th parallel is the dividing line. That is where the two countries end today, as a matter of fact. Okay, China, and then this just shows you what happens in 1950. By 53, it gets pushed back, and then it's a stalemate. So you can kind of see how the North Vietnamese, the North Koreans push down. You watch it there by 51. Then the United States gets involved, and they push back, and they get to a point. And I don't know if the slides will say it, but they get to a point where, had they pushed any further, they would have got China more involved. So they suddenly invade the peninsula in 1950. They nearly take the entire peninsula. In 16 United Nations member nations under U.S. leadership agreed to help South Korea. Again, this is that idea of collective security that began in the League of Nations. Again, a continuity piece here. The USSR sent help, but no troops to, I guess, help South Korea. I don't know, but they sent no troops. China, North Korea, South Korea. Okay, that's just showing you the country. UN troops pushed North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel. That is the border between the two countries. And then they continued north into North Korea, which, again, got the Chinese interested and got them involved. And General MacArthur was leading this, and he gets removed because he wanted to go into China. So Chinese assault drove UN troops back to the 38th parallel. There was a ceasefire, so basically there was just a little back and forth. Nothing goes on. And they create this demilitarized zone, this area between the two countries where there's no arms. It's heavily armed on the North Korean side. but not on the South Korean side. And so this country is divided in half, and it has been that way since '53. And um, early on, especially in this time period, in the '50s, '60s, and '70s, they all saw themselves as Korean because families had, it was one Korea until, well, after World War II, but people came and went. And then with this 38th parallel being created, families were separated permanently. Same thing's going to happen in Berlin. All right, again, there's our map of Korea. All right, that is the demilitarized zone. One side is North Korea, the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And then this side, the side that we are standing on in this photograph, is South Korea. No peace treaty ending the Korean War was ever signed, and tensions in this area and between the two countries remain high today. Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea, is not far from the 30th parallel, from the border. It is well within missile range. The South Koreans are aware of this. The North Koreans are aware of this. The world is aware of this. And North Korea does drills all the time, just to let them know. And again, there's your 30th parallel, and there's a bunch of tunnels, and we'll get to that in just a second. Khrushchev. Joseph Stalin died in '53. Interesting year. Replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who adopted a policy of de-Stalinization, and he promised peaceful coexistence with the West. So this is a marked shift in how the Soviet Union is going to handle dealing with the United States. And let's see how this goes. Stalin called everyone who didn't agree with him an enemy of the people. He said that they wanted to restore the old order, and for this purpose, several 100,000 honest people perished. Everyone lived in fear in those days. Everyone expected that at any moment there would be a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and that knock on the door would prove fatal. People not to Stalin's liking were annihilated. Honest party members, loyal, hard workers for our cause, who had gone through the school of revolutionary struggle under Lenin's leadership. This was utter and complete arbitrariness. And now, is all this to be forgiven and forgotten? Apparently. Khrushchev's relaxed policy sparked rebellions in Eastern Europe against Soviet domination and communism. So again, pulling back the iron fist, so to speak, or topaz fist, if you want a really strong fist. A lot of these countries saw an opportunity because remember, they're just pink on this map because Russia made it all the way to Germany and just decided to keep them. They weren't conquered by the Russians. They just said, hey, you're going to be a satellite state. You're going to do this, this, and this. There were sympathizers, I'm sure. And again, promising these countries and promising the people in these countries work and opportunity is a lovely selling point. Okay. Continuing. From the youngest child to the oldest man, no one wants communism. We have had enough of it forever. We shall never again be slaves. And that's from Hungary. Václav Gomułka and the politics of October. Okay. In '56, riots in Poland led to more autonomy from the Soviet Union and an end to farm collectives. So remember the farm collectives where all the farms were put together and you all farm the land and then the government took it all and distributed it. That ends in Poland because of the riots. They get a little more autonomy, a little more freedom to make their own decisions. You can kind of get the feeling that this probably isn't going to last forever. Just a hunch. Bread and freedom. Imre Nagy, the Hungarian prime minister, the Hungarian flag with communist coat of arms cut out, the symbol of the revolution. There's a picture. There's a statue of Stalin putting down on the ground. They announced free elections and left the Warsaw Pact. Khrushchev sent in the Red Army and crushed the rebellion. So as I suspected, we'll give you a little bit. We'll give you an inch or two, but that's a mile. That's way too much freedom right there. Free elections, that's crazy talk. I saw young students who had known nothing of life under communist and Russian control die for freedom about which they had only heard from others or from their own hearts. I saw a girl of 14 blow up a Russian tank and a grandmother's walk up to the Russian cannons. See, I don't know. How do you see that? Like, there's no way to accurately or honestly imagine that. Like, put it in perspective. Like, some of you were 14 when this year began, and the idea of you being in such a condition, in such a state, or America being in such a state that you would go as a 14-year-old kid and blow up a tank. It's just I don't, and Americans can't fathom this, and that's not a slag on us. It's just it's about you know how worlds are different, and the connectedness of geography and the connectedness of Europe and how all that history is interwoven. This is Hungary calling. This is Hungary calling, the last free station. Forward to the United Nations. Early this morning, Soviet troops launched a general attack on Hungary. We are requesting you to send us immediate aid in the form of parachute troops. It is possible that our broadcast will soon come to the same fate as the other Hungarian broadcasting stations. For the sake of God and freedom, help Hungary. Civilized people of the world, listen and come to our aid. Not with declarations, but with force, with soldiers, with arms. Do not forget that there is no need the rest of it. Basically, Hungary is shut down. The UN does not come. And again, that response or lack of a response leaves a legacy. And when we think about these countries today, as we move through the remainder of this unit and we get to that, you need to think about it. Try to remember as best you can all the history, like all the here was a chance and here was a chance or here was a chance that it just wasn't taken. And we can't be, and the world can't be all things to all people. And there is a sense of realism, but it just seems like there's all these little chances where if this one thing is done, how the trajectory of our history change, how it changes. It's fascinating. The other race. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite to orbit the Earth. This begins the space race. Now it's a race to the moon. Heaven forbid Mars. It's a race to the moon. It's a race to get people in space. And you're going to see, I think, a monkey goes in space, a dog goes in space, all kinds of things go in space. And there's the headline in the New York Times. Let's see what else. It's circling the globe at 18,000 miles an hour. All right, sphere track, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Not out of disrespect, just out of, man, that's crazy. All right. In 1961, the Soviets sent the first man into space. Yuri Gagarin is the first man to go into space and to come back alive, which is nice. In 1969, we put the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. Again, there's a lot of gap in there, and that's okay. I can tell you that it was Kennedy's said by the end of the decade we'd get to the moon. Like, that was part of his platform. That was part of his deal as president, that by the end of the 60s, we would put a man on the moon. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. All right. The space race reflected each nation's attempt to prove the merits of their way of life. Again, sought military applications for space technology. What we're doing is capitalism is better because we got to the moon first. No, communism is better because we got to space first. So it's this back and forth of which way of doing things can lead you to the best result. It's crazy. Khrushchev and Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower invited Khrushchev to the United States for talks. The USSR offered disarmament as the Cold War thawed. So now we're starting to see, for brief moments in time, that there's this little thawing, that Khrushchev really kind of tries to back off a little bit and lets Russia do their thing. Yeah, the space race is a race, and yeah, it's contentious, but it's not militarily contentious. It's not troops on the ground encroaching on borders contentious. It's definitely more ego than anything else. Like, we're gonna get to the moon. You're not getting to the moon. So, in 1960, a U-2, that's not where the band gets its name, spy plane incident ended talks. Okay, the U.S. spy plane shot down over Russia. The pilot was captured. So, if you want to end goodwill, spy on somebody. don't trust them. We all know how it feels when people don't trust us. So imagine how the Soviets felt. And this just kind of shows you these were the flight plans to actually fly from Norway over the Soviet Union to Pakistan, and they didn't make it. The U-2 incident marked the beginning of the most tense period in Cold War history. Powers, okay, the pilot of the shot American plane. Okay, so there you go. After the U-2 was shot down by the Soviets and assuming the pilot had died, the U.S. issued a press release noting that an aircraft had gone missing north of Turkey. The report speculated that the pilot might have fallen unconscious while the autopilot was still engaged, even falsely claiming that the pilot reported over the emergency frequency that he was experiencing oxygen difficulties. In reality, the pilot had survived and revealed to the Soviets that he was spying on the USSR. A few days later, Khrushchev announced, "I must tell you a secret. When I made my first report, I deliberately did not say the pilot was alive and well, and now just look how many silly things the Americans have said." Oops. Because they can't let the Americans know, I guess. In 1961, the Soviets built the Berlin Wall around West Berlin because, remember, Germany's like this. You got, as you're looking at it, you've got West Germany, East Germany. Well, Berlin is in East Germany. And Berlin was divided into 4 sections as well. Each of the four countries, the United States, England, France, and the Soviet Union, all got a piece of Berlin. Well, from 1945, 48 until 1961, people left, and they went to other parts of Berlin. And the Soviets were tired of it, so not literally, but close to literally overnight, a wall went up, separating the Russian part of West Berlin, actually, and then keeping Berliners in there. And there are people standing on there looking on the other side, see how life used to be. Again, still just showing the wall. This is West Berlin, and whoops. And these are the different checkpoints. There's checkpoint Bravo, checkpoint Charlie, from West Berlin to East Berlin. Again, keeping people and from East and West Berlin separate. Whoops. Again, West Berlin, East Berlin. This is the area here where if you got too close to the fence or too close to the wall, you would be shot by men in those towers. Or if you tried to escape to East Berlin, or to West Berlin, excuse me. West Berlin and Ost Berlin. After World War II, the West Berlin was an island behind the Iron Curtain. It was okay. So basically, East Berliners began to move to West Berlin in droves. In fact, before the construction of the wall, 2,000 people a week were moving from east to west. It happened in the dead of night. It was in total secrecy. In the early hours of the 13th of August, the barrier was put in place. Basically, 17 million people were locked in East Berlin. I do believe that this is the Kennedy speech. Yes. I am a Roman citizen. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words Ich bin ein Berliner. Unfortunately, what he's saying is that he's a jelly donut. I think it's Ich bin Berliner is what you would say if you to say you were a Berliner. Again, foreign languages are weird. One little word and it changes everything. In Chinese, one change of inflection and it changes the whole meaning. But they knew what he meant, and the spirit was there, and so they forgave the American president for saying what he said because one, he was Kennedy, he was very, very popular. Two, he's an American trying to speak their language, and three, they got it, they understood. Okay, there it is. I am a jelly donut. Yes, I know. That's what he said. We know. Okay. This is now one thing that's not mentioned here, and hopefully gets mentioned later, is that during the first year that this wall was built, there's an airlift, and we fly planes from England and other parts of Europe and drop food into um, West Berlin or East Berlin, West Berlin, so people can eat. Like this is an airlift for 1 year, just flying stuff because the roads were shut too. They literally made it an island, um, and so we flew stuff over. That was kind of cool. All right, jelly donut. Moving on. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is the second big tense thing in the 1960s. The Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba. We flew a plane over and saw them. And as you can see in the circle, the effective range is right there. Khrushchev authorized, again, this is what happens when you spy on people. Khrushchev authorized placement of Soviet nukes in Cuba. Cuba is 90 miles off the coast of the United States. It was controlled by a communist, Fidel Castro, someone loyal to the Soviet Union, receiving aid from the Soviet Union. Again, this just kind of shows you where the immediate range of the missiles would go. So there you have it. Oh, look. Let's see. Onslow Bay, North Carolina was the largest exercise since World War II. So there you go. That's where we set things up to get ready in case we had to go invade Cuba, because that was part of the deal here, was invading Cuba. All right, and this just shows you the next thing. So what we do instead is we have a quarantine. We set up a line of ships and we stop the Soviet ships from bringing more stuff in. We inspect them. We turn them around. It was a tough 13 day. After a tense 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union come to an agreement. The U.S. promises not to invade Cuba and not to get rid of Castro because they tried it once before in this fiasco called the Bay of Pigs. In return for that assurance, for the United States to make that promise, Russia had to remove the weapons. Soviet Union had to remove the weapons from Cuba. And then we also ended up removing some Jupiter 2 missiles from Turkey. They were older missiles anyway, and we did that later on. So it kind of looked like it was a tit for, this quid pro quo kind of thing, this for that. All right. Whoops. This blockade of navigation in international waters and airspace constituted an act of aggression propelling humankind into the abyss of a world nuclear missile war. So there were thoughts that this blockade, what if a ship didn't stop? Actually, it was an excellent movie we're probably going to watch. All right. After 13 days, there they are, Mr. President. We and you ought not pull on the ends of the rope in which we have tied the knot of war. Because the more the two of us pull, the tighter that knot will be tied. You yourself understand perfectly of what terrible forces our countries depose. Consequently, if there is no intention to tighten that knot and thereby to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measure to untie the knot. We are ready for this. Again, Khrushchev seems, based on these quotes in his PowerPoint, to be a pretty level-headed dude. It makes me want to read a little more about him, but I think he also understands that for his own country's well-being, they can't do this. There's a no-win here. Nobody wins this. So why keep pushing and pushing and pushing? Because ultimately, you get to a point where something is accidentally pushed, or you say something and you can't take it back. Because remember, this is 1962. Okay. Yes, there are satellites, and yes, there is teletype, and yes, there is communication, but it's not email. And you still have to get through it. It still needs, there's still time. So, cooler heads prevailing was the smarter play. After Khrushchev, we get Leonid Brezhnev. He's promising re-Stalinization, and that he's saying Russia could intervene in any communist country it wants to. So he is much more of a hardliner. He thinks, I'm assuming, feels that this was way too soft, and we've got to move on. Oh, okay. Now there's something I will never unsee for as long as I live. Thank you. I now feel so much better about myself. Okay. In 1968, Czechoslovakia's communist leader Alexander Dubček initiated reforms hoping to create socialism with a human face. Okay, so this, I mean, if you remember geography, Czechoslovakia is borders Germany. We know that because they took the Sudetenland. It would not be a surprise if we knew that they had more ties to the West or understood how the West worked a little better than the Soviet Union. So here's a guy trying to um, make this work. This was the action program: freedom of speech, freedom of movement, debate, association, no more random arrests, economic freedoms. So, again, this is all typical Soviet life. Brezhnev ordered the Red Army to invade Czechoslovakia and the reform movement was crushed. This was the Prague Spring, and this reform movement was crushed. This was 1968, I believe. 68 is a big year historically. Like 1848 is a big year. 1968 is a big year. It's a big year. The Prague Spring. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to go to Asia: Bangladesh, India, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. All right. Vietnam War, another proxy war, saw the U.S. try to contain communism, assuming if it spread anywhere, it could spread everywhere. This whole idea of a domino theory. If Bangladesh becomes communist, then what's to stop India, Burma, Thailand, etc., 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 etc. So we got to stop it. We got to nip it in the bud. The U.S. defeat in Vietnam meant a superpower lost to a mostly undeveloped nation. And this diminished the United States' global reputation. Okay, this is a very super oversimplification of this war, and that's okay. There's time for it in U.S. history. There's time for it in class during lunch. We can always ask questions during lunch. Anybody. From 64 to 72, the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world made a maximum military effort with everything short of atomic bombs to defeat a nationalist revolutionary movement in a tiny peasant country and failed. When the United States fought in Vietnam, it was organized modern technology versus organized human beings, and the human beings won. And that's from Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn wrote a book called The People's Book of the United States. So there's definitely a bias here. And I'd be curious as to who his audience is and what his point of view is and things of that sort. But yeah, 64, we actually take over for France. France was there first. And in 64, it was advisors. There was a, arguably what I think is the last good Mel Gibson movie was called We Were Soldiers Once. And that takes place with the first airborne assault, the first time troops are sent to Vietnam, like in force, not as police, not as, what's the word I'm looking for? Not as the one training the other ones as observers or things like that. And that movie's about that first battle. But for the better part of 30 years, 8 years, only 8 years, it was longer than that. We had been over there since the 50s with advisors and people. Shots began being fired in the 60s. But yeah, we could not win, and there's something to be said for that. This is analogous to the American Revolution, where the superior British Army, Navy should have defeated the Patriots. Now, a little different in that I don't think England gave us its undivided attention. We did, but I think Vietnam was also different in how it was fought and in the type of terrain. You would have thought, I'm just making a comment here, you would have thought that after the island fighting in World War II that we would have had a different approach, and we just didn't, and it didn't work. There's Richard Nixon, and there's our good friend. In the 70s, the Cold War thawed again, and this was known as détente. It's kind of like a softening, a thawing of the tensions in the 70s. America couldn't be all blustery after what just happened in Vietnam. And Russia's about to make its big mistake at the end of the 70s too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so there they are trying to test each other, shaking hands with other weapons behind them. Ostpolitik. In 70, détente began with West German Chancellor Willy Brandt's policy of improving relations with East Germany and Eastern Europe. So here's an attempt of the locals, of the German people on the ground, recognizing here's an opportunity to help things out. So Ostpolitik begins this process of trying to thaw and build relations. And if you think about it, anyway, I just realized how much I say that. I need a different sort of transition. Going after the going after the Soviet Union and getting them to change is a challenge. But picking off little places next to it and kind of establishing relationships with them, um, that can be pretty successful. Now that I think about it. All right. Nixon goes to China in 72. He stunned the world by visiting China to normalize relations between the two nations. It's the first president to visit communist China. And in 72, the United States finally recognizes communist China. Remember, for the longest time, the legitimate China, as far as the United States was concerned, was Taiwan, with the old government. In 72, Nixon visits the Soviet Union, and this leads to a series of agreements that ease tension and expand trade. The issue of war and peace cannot be solved unless we in the United States and the Soviet Union demonstrate both the will and the capacity to put our relationship on the basis of consistent, I don't know, trust of one another. Our next president, Nixon and Brezhnev negotiated the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, the SALT Treaty. There were two of those, limiting the number of missiles. Now we're going to stop construction of intercontinental missiles. We have enough. We're just going to stop construction. Okay, and so this, again, we're going to stop selling missiles and everything should be better. Détente peaked with the Helsinki Accords. Basically, all existing political borders so those were all recognized. It protects human rights. It protected political freedoms. This is was a big turning point. Here it is. Here is, excuse me. Here's Russia's Vietnam, Afghanistan. In 79, Brezhnev ignored the accords and he invades Afghanistan. And this ends détente. So all that goodwill, again, this time is ended by the Soviet Union. The US saw the USSR as the aggressive force. Again, this proxy war proved very unpopular in Russia as well, as it dragged on and costs mounted and lives were lost and they weren't winning it. Sound familiar? The U.S. responded with massive weapons buildup, a renewal of the arms race. This further strains the Soviet economy because now they have to continue to build. This takes us to the next leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, became the leader in 85, and he recognizes that the Soviet Union needs to reform its economic system. It cannot maintain this. The political system is corrupt from the core, and it just needs to be cleansed. It needs a colonic. It just does. Many of you see the solution to our problems in resorting to market mechanisms in place of direct planning. Some of you look at the market as a lifesaver for your economies. But comrades, you should not think about lifesavers, but about the ship. And the ship is socialism. Very nice. They pull out of Afghanistan meant a superpower lost to a mostly underdeveloped nation, diminishing the Soviet Union's global reputation. It is also worth knowing. There's a very good Tom Hanks movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's definitely rated R for reasons, language, and Charlie Wilson was a senator, a representative from Texas, and he was a womanizer. So there's that sort of aspect to the film. But he was the man who started really sending funds into Afghanistan to fight the Russians. And so it's an excellent. It's a very entertaining movie. It's probably one of my favorite Tom Hanks movies. Anyway, our next president, Gorbachev, hoped to slow the arms race down with the INF treaty, with the USSR could no longer afford guns versus butter debate. So again, you can't afford when you can't afford butter. I think it's time to stop building guns. So there's that. In '86, Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, which is openness, encouraged citizens to discuss ways to improve society without fear of censorship. So that freedom of the press, that freedom of expression, that maybe turning off the bugs here and there, but the ability to share ideas to help improve the Soviet Union at large, and then Russia locally. Because remember, Russia is still a country. Russia is part of this. It had been in the Russian language for centuries. It was in the dictionaries, law books. As long as there had been dictionaries and law books, it was an ordinary, hardworking, nondescript word that was used to refer to a process, any process of justice of governance. So he didn't make anything up. It's just always been there. That's kind of that's cool. As you can see, Glasnost is beating up Gorbachev, so it's a struggle. All the skeletons in the Soviet closet that have to be dealt with. Do you keep them in there? Do you let them out? There's a lot that would have to be undone, unpacked for the Soviet Union at large and Russia specifically to unravel this communist, really heavy-handed history. And so it's not going to be easy. It'd be a lot of heavy lifting. It'd be ugly. There would be things you wouldn't want to see. But if you want to move forward, sometimes that's what needs to be done. Hi, us. Gorbachev's economic program called Perestroika allowed elements of capitalism. There was some private ownership. There were some free markets. And, as you're thinking about it, think about some potential risks associated with this. Sort of like, Germany kind of reaching out to the satellite places, East Germany, places to the east. Czechoslovakia in 1968 trying their hand at reform. So, it's all there in spots. And now you're going to let Russians themselves kind of get a taste for it. So anyway, what's the difference between communism and capitalism? Under capitalism, people exploit other people. Under communism, it's the other way around. That's funny. Okay. That's very funny. In '89, Gorbachev unveiled this policy of democratization, thank you very much, allowing for free elections in the Soviet Union. Demokratizatia. I tried. There he is. To achieve his overall objective of making the Soviet Union a more open society, he's formulated and is in the process of implementing a strategy of radical reforms. There's economic reform, agricultural reform. There were other reforms. There were 10 of them. He encouraged Eastern Europeans to reform their political systems without fear of invasion, without fear of armed intervention. So again, whatever you need to do to keep the peace. Does this sound like any other empire? Because that's kind of what this is. It's analogous to an empire from the early part of the 20th century and trying to give people a little more autonomy and give people a little more autonomy. That's a nice continuity piece there. And the results almost always are the same. Oh, very nice. Solderness. In '89, Solidarity, that's what that means, an anti-communist, anti-USSR labor union with millions of members, forced Poland to have free elections. So here's the people forcing a communist government to do something to combat itself. Lech Walesa, they lost control of the government. The leader, Lech Walesa, became president of Poland in their first national election. But again, first of all, you're Poland. So historically speaking, the task in front of this man is beyond ginormous. You have very little history as an independent, autonomous, sovereign state. Good luck. In November of '89, East German leaders opened the Berlin Wall. Germany was reunited a year later. And think about how hard, economically, that had to have been on West Germany and West Berlin. All those people coming over and having to absorb all that into your programs. Like that was a very difficult transition from a purely economic and purely, political, how's this going to work sense. But yet they were happy. I would love to have a piece of that. Other Eastern European satellites abandoned communism, Hungary and Czechoslovakia in late 1989. One country doesn't do so well. All right. There's Václav Havel in Czech Republic. In the Velvet Revolution, the people of Czechoslovakia peacefully overthrew communism. The Velvet Revolution. Remember, the Czechs had practice. In 68, they toyed with, they flirted with, they desired independence. And now, in 68, they get it. Sorry, not in 68, but they overthrow communism in 89. The Velvet Revolution, not with guns, but with, flowers and marches. And so a completely different vibe. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu resisted revolution. He was captured and executed. Like, he was a tyrant. He was an autocrat. He liked his authority. He did not want to step down and lose his power. Okay. And so summarily he is executed. I think he was hanged. Oh, shot. Oh, there he is. Okay. So here are all the states. We talked about this earlier. I was very impressed. The collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe inspired republics within the Soviet Union to seek independence. And so now you're going to start to see all these different groups want to be independent states. Some of these had been part of Russia and part of that Russian Federation or that part of this landmass for centuries, forever. They were ethnically Ukrainian, Belarusian, Latvian, whatever, but they were under the control of Russia. And now they wanted this opportunity themselves to become independent states. In 1991, communist hardliners attempted to overthrow Gorbachev in a coup. Again, not wanting to give it up. Let me say that Mikhail Gorbachev is now on vacation. He's undergoing treatment himself in our country. He's very tired after these many years, and he will need some time to get better. That was their attempt to do the coup. Led by Boris Yeltsin, president of the Russian Republic, the Russian people thwarted the coup and rejected communism. Boris. All right. December 91, Gorbachev resigned as president, but by then all the republics had declared their independence, either by conflict or just by leaving communism. So what you see left of this Russian Federation, the Soviet Union has self-dissolved December of 91. Okay, that's an important date. Okay, so December of 91, there it is. Soviet Union dissolves. Okay. So you have Estonia, Latvia, you have these people here, all right, are going to seek independence. Poland's independent. All these green spaces are trying to be independent. The Soviet Union, again, is not going to want to let all this stuff go. They're just not. But this is where we are, December of 91. He had tried to reform the unreformable. Gorbachev really thought he could keep the Soviet Union together by just allowing countries more autonomy. If you think about it, the one thing that may have allowed this to continue is the one thing you can argue they really didn't know how to do. If they could have truly had a working market economy with these countries all industrialized and all having goods and services and all having things that they could trade with one another, then who knows? This could have been. It could have, they could have been sort of like an EU-y kind of thing. Yeah, EU-y. But I think the economic shortcomings and the economic struggles in all these places really, Russia was not in a position to prop them up for the time being, like to offer support. I see his, it's sort of like where his heart is. But he was trying to maintain the Soviet Union in a way he thought was feasible. I just don't, and maybe he knew it wasn't feasible. Maybe this was his plan all along. I don't know. But I just don't see how, because of the economics in these countries, it would have been possible. That's just me. and I could be wrong. And if you know more, or you have a parent or a relative if you have a parent or relative from any of these places, I would love to know what they think of it. All right. The Cold War ended with the breakup of the Soviet Union, leaving the U.S. as the world's sole superpower. Hold on a second. Erase. Okay. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Cold War. I'm not going to make you watch John Green. And that is the Cold War. You can watch it on your own if you feel like it. Next up is Communist China. We're going to focus a little more intently on China itself and on the rise of communism in that country, its relationship with the Soviet Union, its relationship with the United States, and then that North Korean place. We'll get to that maybe tomorrow, either in class or I'll be doing this again. It's up to you. You have the vote. So exercise your exercise your right, and we'll figure out what we're going to do. Anyway, the rest of our week would be Communist China. We're going to look at decolonization, which comes about after World War II, and then a little more at the end of the Cold War. Then we're going to look at probably America's biggest attention grabber consistently. We're going to look at Southwest Asia at the end of the week. So have a great night. Let me get this updated. I'll post it, and I will see you all tomorrow.